Charleston mornings had their own rhythm, a quiet hush before the heat settled in, a mist rising off the harbor, and the steady stream of well-dressed professionals filing into the cafes that lined the historic streets. For Natalie Brooks, caf reverie had been both a lifeline and a cage. It was the job that paid the bills, the place that offered routine and flexibility essentials for a single mother raising a 12-year-old boy on her own. But it was also the place where dreams sat in the corners, folded and forgotten like receipts in an old apron pocket. She moved through the cafe with a grace born of repetition. Her hair was pulled back in a low, efficient bun, her black jeans spotless, and her white shirt rolled at the sleeves. Customers came and went. She smiled, she delivered, she refilled water, but inside, she remained untouched by the hum of it, all moving, breathing, working, but rarely seen. That morning had started like any other. The clink of ceramic, the earthy scent of espresso, laughter from the regulars. She was jotting down an order for an elderly couple when the host's voice .com and clear cut through the din. Reserved table for Mr. Daniel Carter. She didn't flinch, not at first. There were many Carters in Charleston, dozens of Daniels. Her pen kept moving, looping a graceful swirl at the end of the latte on the pad. But when she walked back to the counter, ticket in hand, and glanced down at the reservation confirmation, something inside her cracked wide open. Daniel Carter, her breath caught. Her fingers trembled just enough that she had to press her palm flat on the counter to steady herself. It couldn't be him. 12 years had passed. She had rebuilt her life from nothing, stone by stone, day by day. She had buried the memories, not because they weren't precious, but because they were too dangerous. Because remembering meant hurting, and hurting wasn't something she could afford anymore, not with Leo depending on her for everything. But the name was there, printed in crisp black ink, and when she turned, tray in hand, and approached the corner table by the window, the light streaming in caught the sharp angles of his profile, and the truth struck her like a thunderclap. It was him. He was older now, leaner, more refined. His hair was shorter than she remembered, and there were new lines around his eyes, etched not by time alone, but by pressure, by consequence, by a life spent carrying things she would never see. He wore a navy jacket, no tie, a watch she knew was worth more than her month's rent. His posture was casual, but everything about him still screamed presence, purpose, power, and he hadn't seen her yet. She took a breath and stepped forward. Extra shot, no sugar, she said softly, placing the cup in front of him. He glanced up, eyes meeting hers for a moment. Then, as if seeing through her, he gave a perfunctory nod and returned to his phone. Thanks, he said, without looking again. Natalie stood there for a second longer than she should have, not because she expected him to recognize her. He didn't, but because she was stunned by how much it still hurt. She turned away before her voice could betray her. Back behind the counter, she moved like a ghost, only half present. Marco, the barista, gave her a questioning look, but she shook her head and busied herself, refilling sugar containers. She told herself it didn't matter. He hadn't known, he hadn't looked. She was someone else now, and yet, somewhere deep, inside her chest, something ached with a terrible, unrelenting pulse. 12 years ago, Daniel Carter had been everything. The boy who made promises on the shore, who said he didn't care about money or legacy or the empire waiting for him in the future. The boy who said he'd leave it all behind, just to be with her. He had whispered forever, and then he had disappeared. The weeks that followed had been agony. The calls that went unanswered, the letters returned unopened. The day she stood outside his family estate, 8 months pregnant, begging the guards to let her speak to him, only to be told that Mr. Carter wasn't receiving visitors. She had stood in the rain, hand on her swollen belly, whispering through gritted teeth, "He needs to know," but he never came. Instead, his mother had come to the gate. Evelyn Carter had been as composed as Natalie had been desperate. Her words were clinical, final. Daniel was focused on his future. He didn't want to be burdened. There was no room for a mistake, no space for sentiment. She had handed Natalie a checker number. Natalie had never dared to repeat aloud and instructed her to disappear, and for a moment, just a moment, she'd almost taken it, not for herself, for the child, for the possibility of survival. But in the end, she hadn't cashed it. She had torn it in half, thrown it in the trash outside her apartment, and gone back inside to hold the only thing that mattered, her unborn son. Now that man, the one who had unknowingly changed the course of her life, was sitting 20 feet away, sipping coffee and scrolling through emails. She glanced at the clock. Another hour left in her shift. At the back table, Daniel laughed at something on his phone. That laugh, it was the same. It curled into her chest like smoke, reminding her of summer nights and whispered plans, of stolen kisses and music drifting from the boardwalk. She clenched her hands into fists. It didn't matter that he was here. He didn't know, and she wasn't going to tell him. Later that evening, Natalie stood at the small kitchen counter in their apartment, chopping onions for dinner. Leo sat at the table, hunched over his science notebook, his hair falling into his eyes as he scribbled notes for his robotics project. The windows were open, letting in the last of the autumn air. "Mom," he said suddenly, "did you ever think about moving away, like just starting over somewhere else?" Natalie blinked, the question catching her off guard. "Why do you ask?" Leo shrugged. "I don't know. Charleston's nice and all, but I feel like there's more out there, bigger stuff. People doing important things." She looked at him, really looked at him, really looked at him. Matt, the boy who had her stubbornness and Daniel's restless mind. At the boy who had built his first motorized toy from old blender parts, who spent nights reading about wind turbines and battery storage instead of watching cartoons. "There's always more out there," she said quietly, "but sometimes the most important things are the ones right in front of you." Leo tilted his head, thoughtful. "Do you ever think about my dad?" Her hands stilled. The question wasn't new. It came up more often now, though always in a sideways fashion, never direct, never confrontational. Natalie had built walls around that truth, so carefully that even her own son had learned not to press too hard. "I think about him sometimes," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Do you think he thinks about me?" She hesitated, then, slowly, "I don't know, Leo." He nodded, accepting it, but not believing it. She could tell. He was beginning to understand that there were pieces missing in the puzzle of his life, and soon he would start looking for them on his own. That night, after Leo had gone to bed, Natalie walked into her room and opened the small wooden box beneath her nightstand. Inside, carefully folded, were the letters she had written and never sent. The photo of her and Daniel on the beach, and a tiny hospital bracelet with Leo's name on it. She stared at Daniel's face in the photo. He was 17, shirtless, suntanned, eyes crinkling with laughter. She was leaning into him, her smile wide and careless. They had loved each other once, and now he was back, except he didn't know what he'd left behind, and maybe, she thought, maybe he never would. The scent of tomato and basil lingered in the small kitchen as Natalie stirred the simmering pot of marinara sauce. The bubbling rhythm against the metal pot had a calming effect, a comfort born out of routine. Cooking always gave her a sense of control, something tangible in a life that often felt like it was built on sand. Outside, the soft glow of twilight blanketed the Charleston skyline, casting gold over the rooftops and porches of their neighborhood. She glanced at the clock above the stove. Almost 6. Leo would be home any minute from his after-school robotics club. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and turned down the flame, her mind still caught in a loop from earlier that morning. Daniel's face, the way he hadn't recognized her, the easy way he had said thank you and gone back to scrolling on his phone, kept flashing in her mind like a stuttering film reel. A key turned in the lock. "Mom, I'm home." Leo's voice carried through the small apartment, full of that edge of teen energy that never seemed to tire. In the kitchen, she called back. He appeared moments later, backpack slunk off his shoulder, a smudge of something dark on his cheek oil, maybe, and a huge grin on his face. His dark curls bounced as he walked in, and she felt that familiar swell of pride every time she looked at him. 12 years old, and already more driven than most adults she knew. There was a light in him, a hunger to understand the world. "We added solar sensors to the wind turbine model," he said, talking fast as he grabbed a slice of bread from the counter. "If we can get it to store power in small batteries, I might be able to run a water filtration system with it. Isn't that cool?" "That is cool," she said, smiling as she handed him a glass of water. "But wash your hands before you sit down. You're covered in whatever science magic you were working on." He groaned but obeyed, dropping his backpack near the kitchen table before heading to the bathroom. Natalie turned back to the stove, pretending her hands weren't shaking, just slightly. At dinner, Leo talked non-stop about his project, about his friend Omar who had tried to program their robot to dance, about the teacher who promised to enter their design in the state fair if they could get it working by next month. I think I want to study environmental engineering when I get to college, he said between bites of garlic bread. You've got plenty of time to figure that out, she said gently. I know, but it helps to aim high, right? He asked, eyes bright with ambition. I mean, if I work hard, maybe I could get a scholarship, like a big one. She nodded, heart twisting a little. I'm sure you will. He paused, pushing his pasta around his plate. Tommy's dad is teaching him to build a go-kart this weekend. They're putting it together in their garage. Natalie's fork slowed. Leo's voice was too casual, practiced. Do you think I'll ever get to do stuff like that with you? No, my dad. She looked at him, really looked at him, his hopeful eyes, the vulnerability in the way he asked the question like he was tiptoeing across glass. I don't know, sweetheart, she said softly. He frowned, but didn't press. He never did. Natalie had always been careful, feeding him vague answers wrapped in half-truths. He wasn't ready. We were too young. It didn't work out. But as Leo grew older, smarter, she could feel his patience thinning. The gaps in her story were beginning to show. Later that night, after dishes had been cleared and homework reviewed, Leo retreated to his room, music playing softly behind his closed door. Natalie sat in the living room, a worn blanket draped over her knees, the TV flickering in front of her, though she wasn't really watching. She reached for the old tin box on the shelf, a relic from another life. Inside were the fragments of everything she had fought so hard to forget. A photograph of her and Daniel, their faces flushed with summer sun. A bracelet made of string and seashells he'd tied around her wrist one night at Folly Beach, and letters, dozens of them. Some were creased from being opened and reread too many times. Others had never been sent at all. She pulled out one with shaky handwriting, written in the weeks after he had vanished. Daniel, I don't understand. I went to your house. Your mother told me things I don't want to believe. But why won't you answer? You said you loved me. You said you'd never disappear like your father did. I just need to hear it from you. Even if it's goodbye, just let me know. She folded it carefully and set it aside. The truth had been messy. Daniel's silence, Evelyn Carter's icy precision, that awful day at the estate gate when she had stood, belly round and aching, and Evelyn had handed her a letter Daniel never wrote, and an envelope filled with cash, all with the grace of someone making a transaction. She'd left Charleston for a time, moving in with a friend of her aunt's in Savannah until Leo was born. She worked nights. She held her son through colic fevers and midnight feedings. She built her life from scratch, not because she was strong, but because she had no other choice. That now, fate had looped back around. She had seen him again, and he hadn't even known who she was. Some part of her had always held out hope that the truth would come out one day, that he'd find her, that he'd want to know. But the reality had landed differently. He hadn't looked for her. He hadn't remembered her face. He hadn't known his son had sat 3 booths away from him in the cafe dozens of times over the past year. And now, as she sat there in the hush of her apartment, those truths bore down on her like a slow, heavy tide. The next day, Natalie picked Leo up from school. He bounced into the passenger seat, babbling about solar panels and wire kits. As she pulled out onto the street, he said, I signed us up for the Carter Foundation Gala. Did I tell you? Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Signed us up, she asked. For the Student Innovation Showcase, he said proudly. They're inviting middle schoolers this year. Mr. Carpenter helped me fill out the form. We're on the list. She forced a smile. That's great, honey. He didn't notice her discomfort. He kept talking. It's at the Charleston Grand, huge ballroom, black tie stuff. But it's not just rich people, it's families, donors, and community partners. They even pick one student to give a speech. Wouldn't that be wild? She nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. The Carter Foundation, of course it was. Of course the man who had unknowingly left her behind was now funding future geniuses like their son. She felt the universe laughing. That night, as Leo slept, Natalie stared at her bedroom ceiling, unsure what scared her more, the idea of seeing Daniel again, or the thought that Leo might one day look him in the eye and see the resemblance for himself. How long could she keep the truth hidden? How long could she protect Leo from the complicated storm of her past? She didn't have the answers, but deep down, she knew the question wasn't going away, and neither, it seemed, was Daniel Carter. The chandeliers above the Charleston Grand Ballroom glittered like stars trapped in crystal. Waiters in white gloves moved silently between tables, draped in deep navy linens, placing hors d'oeuvres beside gold-embossed name cards. The Carter Foundation Gala was everything Natalie had imagined and everything she had dreaded. She stood near the rear of the room. Her navy dress modest but elegant, borrowed from a friend who insisted she wear something worthy of the occasion. She had twisted her hair into a low chignon and applied makeup with a trembling hand. Not because she cared what anyone here thought, but because Leo would be proud. And tonight was about him. He stood a few feet away at the student showcase exhibit, nervously adjusting his lapel pin that read Sustainable Innovation Finalist. His display board gleamed under the soft lighting. Blueprints, photos, a small working prototype of the wind-powered water purification unit he had designed. It was simple, brilliant, humble, just like him. Natalie had rehearsed her role in her mind all week. Supportive mother, quiet shadow. She would clap when appropriate, smile on cue, and pray she didn't lock eyes with the man whose name was etched in gold above the stage. Daniel Carter. He hadn't come to the café again, not since that morning. Maybe it had been coincidence. Maybe fate had just brushed past her to remind her what could never be. Either way, she had convinced herself she could survive tonight without losing her balance. That resolve faltered the moment she spotted him. He stood near the stage, his posture relaxed, but unmistakably authoritative. Charcoal suit, no tie, silver cufflinks that glinted when he raised his glass. He was greeting donors, shaking hands, smiling in that effortless way that made people feel like they were the only ones in the room. Natalie's heart stuttered. This man, the one commanding a room filled with legacy and wealth, was the same boy who once kissed her under a dripping pier at midnight, and vowed he'd never be like his father. She turned her gaze quickly to Leo, grounding herself. He was speaking now, animated, explaining the way the solar panels switched energy sources depending on weather conditions. The adults around him listened, amused and curious, nodding as he spoke with more confidence than Natalie had ever seen. One of the foundation's assistants approached Natalie quietly. "Miss Brooks," she startled. "Yes, we're about to begin. Your son has been selected to deliver the opening address for the Student Innovation segment. Would you follow me backstage?" Natalie blinked. "He's giving a speech." The woman smiled. "He wrote something earlier this week. It was reviewed and approved this morning." Natalie looked toward Leo, who was already being ushered toward the side curtains. A small note card clutched in his hand. He hadn't told her, but as she caught the glance, he threw her way, nervous, hopeful she understood. He wanted to surprise her, he wanted to make her proud, and perhaps he wanted something else too. The ballroom hushed as the lights dimmed, and a voice echoed across the speaker system. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our first student speaker of the evening, Leo Brooks." Applause filled the space. Natalie moved discreetly to the side, heart in her throat. Leo stepped onto the stage, small against the grand backdrop of velvet curtains and marble podiums, but his voice rang clear. "Hi, I'm Leo Brooks, and I'm 12 years old." Soft laughter rippled through the room. "I live here in Charleston with my mom. She's the strongest person I know. She raised me by herself while working long hours and helping me build solar panels in our living room. If my project works, it's because of her." Natalie felt her breath catch. Several heads turned toward her, and she forced herself to smile through the burn behind her eyes. Leo continued, "I used to think I wanted to be just like Elon Musk, or the guys who build rockets and stuff. But now I realize I want to be someone who solves problems for people who are overlooked, people who don't always have clean water or power. That's what innovation should be for." More applause. Natalie couldn't see Daniel's face from her angle, but she knew he was watching. Leo paused, then said something she hadn't seen on the note card he'd rehearsed. "I also want to say something personal." The room quieted further. "I've never met my dad. I used to think it was because he didn't want to be around, but now I understand. Sometimes adults make mistakes they don't know how to fix. Sometimes they're kept from the truth." Natalie's body froze. Leo's voice trembled for the first time. "If my dad is out there, I just want him to know. I don't hate him. I just wish he'd ask about me, because I'm not mad. I want to know him." Gasps echoed. Then, silence. Natalie's chest tightened so hard she thought she might faint. And then, one sound broke through the crowd, a chair scraping back. Daniel stood. He didn't rush the stage. He didn't shout, but his face was stricken, white with shock. Leo stared at him, recognition dawning slowly, not from memory but from a gut instinct that Natalie had always feared might surface. Daniel took one step forward before stopping. His eyes found Natalie's across the room, and the unspoken question was like a fire between them. Is it true? And in her eyes, he saw the answer. She turned away, unable to breathe. The moment fractured into a dozen versions of reality. People whispering. The foundation director trying to take back control. Leo being gently led from the stage. But all Natalie could feel was the weight of a secret, finally bursting at the seams. Backstage, she found Leo sitting on a chair, shoulders slumped, his tie askew. He looked up as she approached. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." She crouched beside him. "You didn't." He studied her. "Did you see him stand up?" "Yes." "Is he?" She couldn't speak. She nodded. Leo blinked. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. "I think I already knew." She pulled him into her arms, holding him tightly as the world spun around them. That night, the gala faded into memory. Natalie took Leo home through the quiet Charleston streets, neither of them saying much. The air felt changeless, like the calm before a storm, and more like the stillness after one had passed through, wrecking everything but somehow leaving. The sky clearer. She tucked Leo into bed and sat beside him for a long while, brushing a curl off his forehead. "Will you talk to him?" he asked. She swallowed. "I don't know." He looked shocked, but not mad. She nodded slowly. He didn't know. "Not really." "Would you want him to know?" Natalie looked at her son. "I want him to want to know." When she finally stood and walked out, she paused in the doorway and whispered, "Good night, Leo." He opened one eye, smiled sleepily. "Good night, Mom." She closed the door and leaned against it, heart thudding, tears slipping down her cheeks. Somewhere across the city, Daniel Carter was staring into a truth that would dismantle everything he thought he knew. And Natalie, for the first time in years, wasn't sure if she wanted to run or finally be seen. Daniel Carter had always believed in clarity, in business, in decisions, in life. He'd trusted facts, outcomes, measurable impact. Ambiguity made him restless. But since the gala, his world had been appended, not by numbers or data, but by something as fragile and undeniable as a 12-year-old boy's voice cracking under stage lights. He hadn't slept, not really. He'd spent the night walking the floors of his Sullivan's Island beach house, the tide crashing endlessly outside the windows, while inside him, a storm even louder raged. Leo Brooks. The name alone should have meant nothing. But when that boy had spoken, when his face had tilted slightly into the spotlight, eyes scanning the room with hope and hurt, something had shifted in Daniel's chest. Recognition without reason. A jolt without context. And when he stood without understanding why, he felt every head turn to follow his motion. And then her. Natalie. His gaze had landed on her like gravity, and in an instant, memory flooded in. That summer, her laugh echoing through humid evenings, the way she'd pressed wildflowers into the pages of his sketchpad, her soft hands pulling him toward the beach, when he'd confessed he might walk away from his family's company forever. And then, nothing. He remembered her in pieces, and yet he didn't remember the end. His mother's voice filled the silence now, even 12 years later. She left town. It was better that way. That's what Evelyn had told him. And in his arrogant youth, he'd believed it. He'd gone to Stanford, thrown himself into business school, started building something from nothing. But now a boy stood between those years, a boy with his jawline, his storm-gray eyes, his restlessness. Daniel hadn't needed a paternity test to know the truth. Not in his bones. Not after looking at Natalie that night. She had known, and she hadn't told him. The next morning, Daniel stood at the iron gate of a narrow townhouse, nestled in Charleston's French Quarter. He wasn't sure how he'd found the courage to come. Perhaps it wasn't courage at all, just necessity. There were questions clawing at his ribs, things that had once been stolen from him, and now begged to be reclaimed. He rang the bell. His heart thudded as footsteps approached. When the door opened, she stood there barefoot, a cardigan pulled over her t-shirt, face guarded. They stared at each other. "For too long, Daniel," she said finally. His name sounded both foreign and familiar from her lips. "Natalie," he replied, quieter than intended. "I can re-talk." Her eyes flicked past him, checking for press, for scandal. maybe for escape. But she didn't shut the door. Instead, she nodded and stepped back. The living room was modest, lived in. A violin case sat beside a second-hand bookshelf. On the coffee table, science magazines, LEGOs, a broken circuit board, and a bowl of green apples. The scent of lemon cleaner lingered faintly in the air. He took it all in like a man remembering. The color of a dream after waking. She motioned toward the sofa. He sat. Natalie remained standing, arms crossed loosely. He didn't know how to begin, so he started with what hurt the most. Why didn't you tell me? Her breath hitched, but her voice stayed even. You didn't want to know. That's not true. She gave a hollow laugh. Isn't it? Daniel, I went to your house. I stood outside those gates, 8 months pregnant, in the rain. I begged the guards. I wrote you letters. I was desperate. He paled. I never got them. I know, she said bitterly. Your mother did. She gave me a check instead, told me it was all I'd ever get. His stomach turned. She said you'd moved, that you'd made a clean break. Natalie's voice cracked. I didn't have the luxury of a clean break. I had a child, and no support. I worked double shifts and slept 4 hours a night for years. I held his hand through every fever, every scraped knee. I answered every question he asked about the father who never came. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped. I didn't know. I swear to you, if I had. She shook her head. It doesn't matter anymore. It does, he said. It matters more than anything. They sat in silence. Natalie broke it first. He's a good kid. I know. He's smart. Scary smart. I saw that. He's incredible. She looked at him sharply. Don't say that if you're going to disappear again. I'm not. She raised an eyebrow. I mean it, he said. I've missed 12 years. I won't miss another day. Not if you'll let me be part of his life. Natalie moved to the window, drawing back the sheer curtain with one hand. Daniel, I don't know what you want from us. I want to know him. I want to show him I care. I want to learn how to be his father, even if I'm late. And what happens when the media finds out? She asked, voice rising. When they start asking why the golden boy of Carter Enterprises had a secret son with the waitress he left behind. Do you think he deserves to be a headline? No, Daniel said. I think he deserves the truth, and a father who fights for him. She turned to face him fully now. You can't just walk in and fix it all. Daniel, this isn't a deal, it's a life. I'm not trying to fix it. I'm trying to start. He stood, suddenly feeling like the room was too small for the weight between them. I'll give you space, but please, let me see him. Not today, not on your terms. I just want a chance. She nodded slowly, cautiously. Come by tomorrow, she said. After school, I'll tell him. He exhaled, a quiet breath of disbelief. Thank you. When he left, the street outside looked brighter somehow. But inside, Natalie felt a storm, still brewing. She hadn't expected him to come, and she certainly hadn't expected him to look so hollow when she spoke of those lost years. But if she let him in, really let him in, could she trust him not to disappear again? That night, as she tucked Leo into bed, she ran her fingers through his hair. Hey, she said softly, how would you feel about seeing your dad tomorrow? Leo's eyes widened, then narrowed. He wants to. He came here. He wants to try. For a long time, Leo said nothing. Then, will you be there too? Of course. He nodded once, turned over, and pulled the covers up. She kissed his temple, and in the dark, whispered the same promise she'd made to him 1,000 times over the years. I've got you, always. But for the first time, she wondered if, maybe just maybe, she wouldn't have to carry it all alone anymore. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the impossible possibility of a second chance. The knock on the door came just after 4. Natalie had been waiting for it, pacing the living room with the nervous energy of someone hosting a storm rather than a guest. Leo sat on the couch, legs crossed, fidgeting with the same piece of wire he'd been twisting for 20 minutes. He hadn't asked any more questions since last night, but his silence had weight. She moved to the door and opened it. Daniel stood there, dressed simply in jeans and a grey sweater, holding a paper bag in one hand. I brought brownies, he said, with the faintest of smiles. Figured I shouldn't show up empty-handed. Natalie stepped aside. Come in. He entered quietly, looking not like the executive whose name sat atop foundation buildings, but like someone trying to remember how to be human in a place that once knew him. Leo looked up, stiffened slightly, then stood. Daniel set the bag on the kitchen counter, glanced once at Natalie for reassurance, then walked to the boy who had undone his entire world with a few brave words on a stage. "Hi," Daniel said softly. Leo nodded. "Hi." There was a long pause. Then Daniel said, "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything, but I'd like to get to know you, if that's okay." Leo didn't answer at first. Then, "What's your favorite color?" Daniel blinked, then chuckled, caught off guard. "Ah, blue, I guess. Midnight blue. Yours?" "Forest green," Leo replied. "Not lime." "That's just loud." A small smile touched Natalie's lips. It was exactly the kind of sideways, practical logic Leo always used when sorting through things: friends, books, the world. Daniel's smile widened. "Good call. Loud colors are overrated." They stood there, two strangers with the same shape of cheekbones and the same habit of clasping their hands, when unsure. Finally, Natalie said gently, "Leo, why don't you show him your workshop?" Leo hesitated, then motioned toward the hallway. "Come on, it's this way." Daniel followed, glancing once back at her with something between disbelief and gratitude. Natalie remained in the living room. Listening, she heard the creak of the old floorboard in Leo's room, the low hum of voices, a laugh, Daniel's quick and surprised, as though something had truly delighted him. Then Leo's voice, more animated now, pointing out his models and his prototypes. She could imagine him pulling out his notebooks, the pages full of sketches and ideas for things the world didn't yet know it needed. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tight in her lap, and for the first time in years, she let herself imagine a future not built on endurance but on possibility. They re-emerged 40 minutes later. Daniel's hair was dusted with a bit of sawdust, and Leo was holding a small 3D printed gear in his palm like it was a treasure. Natalie stood. "Your son is a genius," Daniel said quietly, eyes on her. She smiled faintly. "I know." Leo yawned, the adrenaline of the afternoon wearing off. "I've got homework," he mumbled, already heading down the hall. "Okay," Natalie said. "Dinner in an hour." When the bedroom door closed, Daniel stayed rooted in place, unsure if he should stay. "Sit," she said. They sat across from each other on the couch, a quiet tension between them but no longer sharp, just ... cautious. "I don't know how to do this," Daniel admitted. "Being a father, being around you. Again, I feel like I'm stumbling in the dark." She looked at him carefully. "You are." He laughed once. "Thanks for the honesty, but you're trying," she added. "That counts for more than you realize." Daniel leaned forward. "Natalie, I want to be part of his life. Not just visits or holidays. I want to show up, to know him, be there for him. And I don't want to do it behind your back or around your schedule. I want to do it right." She studied him. "And what does that look like to you?" "Co-parenting, if you'll allow it. Building a relationship with both of you, and maybe learning how to rebuild some kind of trust with you too." Her expression softened, but it didn't erase the shadow in her eyes. "It's not just about showing up, Daniel. It's about staying. When things get messy, when it's not convenient, when you get frustrated or tired or scared." "I will," he said, voice firm, "if you give me the chance." She looked down at her hands. "It's not that simple. The world isn't fair to women like me. One misstep, and suddenly, I'm a gold digger or a scandal." His voice was low. "I'd never let that happen. Maybe not intentionally, but the press doesn't care about intention. They'll tear us apart. And Leo... he's not ready for that." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand. I do. And I'll be careful. I won't let him get dragged into a media circus. I'll protect him. I swear it." A long silence passed between them. Then she asked a question she hadn't dared speak in years. "Why didn't you ever look for me?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "I did at first, but I was angry, confused. My mother told me you'd chosen to leave, that you didn't want anything from me, that you'd made your choice. And you believed her. I was 20. I was stupid. And maybe deep down I was scared you had left me." Her eyes glistened. "I never would have." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I know that now." They sat with the weight of the years between them, years that had been stolen by silence, by pride, by the manipulations of someone neither of them had fully confronted yet. "She took that from us," Natalie whispered. "From all of us." Daniel's jaw clenched. "She did." Natalie stood and walked to the kitchen. She opened the bag he had brought, pulled out the brownies, and placed them on a plate. She returned and handed it to him. "They're from Lily's, right?" She asked the bakery on King Street. He looked surprised. Yeah, I used to go there on Sundays, before I had Leo. He nodded. I remember. You liked the raspberry ones. She sat again. I like them less now. They remind me of what I lost. He didn't argue. She took a breath. One step at a time, Daniel. That's all I can promise. He smiled, genuine, hopeful. That's more than I expected. That night, as Daniel drove back across the bridge to Sullivan's Island, the sky was streaked with late amber and dusky rose. The air smelled like salt and redemption. He had miles to go, mistakes to atone for, relationships to rebuild. But today, he had spoken to his son. He had laughed with him, seen himself in him. And maybe, just maybe, he had taken the first step toward becoming someone Leo could count on. Not just a name, not just a face in a boardroom photo, but a father, one who had finally come home. Riverfront, park stretched out in golden sunlight, the early spring breeze tugging gently at the edges of the picnic blanket Natalie had laid out beneath a massive oak. The branches swayed overhead, casting shifting patterns of light and shade on the ground as though the sky itself couldn't decide if it wanted to be bold or quiet today. She could relate. Daniel was due any moment. Leo was already 20 feet ahead, his sneakers thudding across the grass as he chased a frisbee thrown by his neighbor, Max. They'd met through school robotics club and had become inseparable ever since. Natalie watched her son, the way his limbs had lengthened in the past year, how his laughter had grown deeper, more certain. He was becoming someone, and today, for the first time, she would share that becoming with someone else. The thought made her heart ache, but not with regret. With a strange, cautious hope, Daniel arrived just after 3, carrying a canvas tote and looking slightly out of place in a pressed button-down and slacks. Still, the moment his eyes found Leo, who had just turned and waved enthusiastically, something shifted in his posture. He dropped the formality like a stone and walked barefoot across the grass. After removing his shoes, I didn't know what to bring, he said as he reached her, so I panicked and brought everything I remembered. Leo mentioning last week, watermelon cubes, Capri Sun, and Cheez-Its. Natalie laughed despite herself. That's pretty accurate. Daniel knelt beside the blanket and began unpacking the food. His movements were careful, almost reverent, as though this laying out snacks meant more than a boardroom speech, or $1 million deal, and maybe it did. Leo bounded back toward them, cheeks flushed. I beat Max 2 times, he announced. 3. If you count the drop, Max called out, grinning as he jogged toward his own family. Daniel ruffled Leo's hair. An instinctual motion, he paused, mid-act, as if seeking permission. Leo didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He just smiled up at him, shy but open. Natalie pretended not to notice how Daniel's eyes turned glassy for a moment. They all sat on the blanket. Leo dove into the snacks, and Daniel handed him a juice pouch without a word. Like he'd always done this. Like this was normal. But nothing about this moment was normal. It was extraordinary. You built all those circuits by yourself? Daniel asked, nodding toward the mini prototype Leo had brought in his backpack. Mostly. Mum helped me test stuff. She did, huh? Daniel glanced at Natalie, impressed. I learned fast, she said with a shrug. And I read a lot when he sleeps. Leo pulled out a set of instructions he had printed for a new solar panel model and began explaining it to Daniel, who listened with undivided attention, not just as a father, but as someone genuinely interested. He asked questions, let Leo correct him, even admitted when he didn't understand a term. Natalie leaned back on her elbows, letting herself be a spectator to something she'd never thought she'd witness. The two halves of Leo's world were sitting beside each other, not competing but completing. They spent over an hour building a tiny cardboard prototype from a kit Leo had brought. Daniel fumbled more than once with the adhesive, which made Leo snort with laughter. Natalie didn't miss the way Daniel took it in stride, grinning, playful, unbothered by imperfection. That, more than anything, told her how much he'd changed. Later, as Leo ran off again, Natalie and Daniel found themselves alone under the oak tree. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky into a watercolor of soft pastels. Daniel glanced sideways at her. He's really amazing. I know, she said softly. I keep thinking about all the birthdays I missed, the science fairs, first steps, first words. His voice cracked slightly. It's a list I can never fix. No, she said gently. But you can start a new list. Daniel exhaled. I want to. They watched Leo in silence for a while. Then Daniel said, "There's something I haven't told you." Natalie turned wary. "What is it?" "I confronted my mother." She froze. When she asked, 2 days ago, I flew to the New York estate and met her face to face. What did she say? Daniel looked down at his hands, then back at her. At first, she pretended she didn't remember. Then she claimed she was protecting me from distractions, from making mistakes. Natalie's stomach tightened. "And you believed that once?" "I did. I don't anymore." "What did you say to her?" "I told her I wasn't a child, that her interference cost me something I'll never get back." He swallowed. "I told her I had a son, that his name is Leo, and that she doesn't get to erase people anymore." Natalie felt her throat close. She didn't take it well. He added, "Said I was letting emotion cloud my judgment, that this would ruin my reputation. And you, I told her, it would save my soul." Natalie looked away, blinking fast. Daniel reached over, gently touching her hand where it rested on the blanket. "I can't undo what she did to you, or what I failed to do. But I'm here now. I want to be different." She looked at their hands, how his fingers didn't clutch or demand, but simply waited. "You already are," she said. They stayed that way for a while, hands lightly touching, watching the boy they had once created in fear, now living in defiant joy. As twilight set in, Leo returned with a daisy crown he and Max had made from the field nearby. "Here," he said, placing it crookedly on Natalie's head. Daniel chuckled. "Royal treatment." "Mum's the queen of everything," Leo declared, dropping dramatically onto the blanket. Natalie smiled and kissed her son's cheek. "And you?" Daniel asked him. "What does that make you?" Leo grinned. "Future inventor of the century." "And me?" Daniel asked, almost teasing. Leo looked thoughtful. Then he said, "You're the guy who's trying." Daniel stilled, then he nodded. "I'll take that." Natalie wrapped an arm around Leo. "We all are." They stayed until the stars began to peek out one by one, until the air grew cooler and the promise of school the next day nudged them toward home. As they packed up, Natalie caught Daniel watching them, her and Leo, as if trying to imprint the moment into memory. "You don't have to memorize it," she said quietly. "You can be part of it." Daniel nodded. "That's all I've ever wanted." That night, after Leo was asleep and the dishes were done, Natalie stepped out onto her porch. She pulled her cardigan tight and stared up at the sky, at the stars pulsing softly against the velvet dark. Inside, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "Thank you for today, for letting me try." She replied without hesitation. Today mattered. Let's see what tomorrow brings. And for the first time in 12 years, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an open door. The invitation had come in a glossy white envelope embossed with silver, the Carter Foundation Annual Gala. For over 2 decades, it had been one of Charleston's most prestigious charity events, a night of elegance, networking, and curated generosity. But this year, the stakes were different. This year, Daniel wasn't just attending as the foundation's heir. He was walking into the ballroom with a truth he could no longer keep buried. Natalie hadn't wanted to come. She'd said no twice, then hesitated on the third. Not because she lacked strength, but because she feared the weight of public scrutiny, same kind of scrutiny that had swallowed her reputation once before. But Daniel had looked at her with eyes that no longer belonged to a distant executive, but to a man reclaiming his life. "I need them to hear it," he'd said, "not from a headline, from me." And so she came. She wore a navy silk dress, understated but striking, her hair pulled into a low sheen. Leo had insisted on helping her choose her earrings. He was staying with a neighbor for the night, and when Natalie kissed his forehead goodbye, he'd whispered, "You're braver than Wonder Woman." Daniel met her outside the venue. He was already inside a storm of flashing cameras and whispers when she arrived. But the moment he saw her, he left the press behind and walked to her like no one else existed. "You don't have to say anything," she murmured as they entered. "I know," he said, offering his arm, "but I do." The Charleston Grand Convention Hall glowed in gold and crystal, a symphony of laughter and classical music swirling beneath its vaulted ceilings. Guests mingled, wineglasses clinking, the scent of magnolias drifting from the floral arrangements that lined the stage. But Daniel barely noticed. He saw only the quiet anticipation in Natalie's eyes, the subtle trembling of her fingers, the way she never let go of her clutch, as if it were armor. The evening unfolded as expected: speeches, auctions, applause. And then, just after the final donation tally was announced, The MC took the podium. "We are honored tonight to welcome our foundation's visionary leader. Please welcome Daniel Carter." Applause erupted. He stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the stage. Natalie's heart pounded. Daniel paused at the microphone, looking out over the sea of familiar faces, donors, CEOs, old family friends. Among them, seated in the front row, sat Evelyn Carter, immaculate as always, dressed in pearl white, her expression unreadable. Daniel cleared his throat. "I had a speech prepared," he began, voice calm, a safe one, polished, full of statistics and gratitude. "But tonight, I don't want to be safe." The room quieted. "I want to be honest." He glanced once at Evelyn, then back at the crowd. "For most of my life, I've been told what I should care about, what I should hide, what I should sacrifice in the name of legacy. But what is a legacy if it's built on silence?" Natalie's breath caught. 12 years ago, I lost something," Daniel continued. "Someone, really, because of decisions I wasn't allowed to make, because of truths I was kept from. Tonight, I want to reclaim that truth." He looked down, just for a second, then lifted his gaze again, and it no longer wavered. "I have a son," he said. A gasp rippled through the audience. "His name is Leo Brooks. He is 12 years old, brilliant, kind, fierce in his convictions, and he is mine." Natalie felt her pulse roar in her ears. "Some of you may wonder why I'm saying this here," Daniel went on. "Why now? The answer is simple. Because I won't build another day of my life on lies. Not as a man, not as a father, not as a Carter." The silence in the room had grown dense, not hostile, but heavy with reckoning. "I owe my son the dignity of being claimed. I owe the woman who raised him, who sacrificed everything while I was told to forget, my respect and my apology. And I owe myself the chance to live with integrity." Daniel turned slightly, gaze landing on Natalie. "I stand here tonight not just as a representative of the Carter Foundation, but as a father who's choosing truth, no matter the cost." He stepped back. The applause came slowly, hesitant at first, but then it grew. Not just polite, but rising, steady, sincere. Natalie couldn't move. People turned to look at her. Yes, but for the first time, the looks weren't laced with judgment. They were wide with surprise, even admiration. Some nodded in quiet approval, and Evelyn, her face was pale. Her hands were still, but something in her eyes cracked barely but unmistakably. Daniel returned to Natalie's side, breath uneven. "I meant every word," he whispered. "I know," she said. They left the hall together, stepping into the Charleston night, where the air was cooler, freer. Neither of them spoke as they reached the valet. Daniel's hand brushed against hers, uncertain. Natalie didn't pull away. That as they stood beneath the soft glow of street lamps, a black car pulled up to the curb. The driver opened the back door, but Natalie didn't move toward it. Instead, she looked up at Daniel. "You changed something in there," she said. "I hope so. You changed me," she added quietly. He swallowed. "I've been trying to change myself. I see that they didn't kiss. They didn't have to. What passed between them then was heavier than a kiss. It was belief." When she stepped into the car and the door closed behind her, Daniel stood alone on the curb for a moment, letting the wind tug at his suit jacket. He felt stripped and robed, also clean, like a man who had finally spoken his own name aloud. The next morning, the headlines broke. Daniel Carter reveals secret son at Foundation Gala, from legacy to fatherhood. Carter heir claims his truth. The woman behind the whispered rumors steps into the light. The media storm was swift and ruthless. Paparazzi gathered near Natalie's house. Old photos resurfaced. Tabloids speculated. Blogs frothed with theories. But something else happened, too. Parents wrote letters of support. Women thanked her for her dignity. Young men asked Daniel about fatherhood, about regret, about redemption. And Leo asked if he could bring a picture of the gala to school, just for show and tell. Natalie laughed, and said yes. That afternoon, Daniel arrived at their porch with sandwiches and a camera. "I figured we could make some new memories," he said. Natalie opened the door wider. "Come in," she said, and for once, he did not hesitate. The ocean was quieter at dawn. Waves crept gently onto the shore of Sullivan's Island, leaving behind thin silver trails in the sand that vanished almost as soon as they arrived. The horizon blushed with the first hints of sunlight, casting the beach in the hushed, reverent stillness that only morning could bring. Natalie stood barefoot on the wet shoreline. her arms wrapped tightly around her sweater. The air was sharp, but not cruel, the way early spring always was on this stretch of South Carolina coast. She didn't know how long she had been standing there before she heard footsteps behind her. "I didn't think you'd come," Daniel's voice said softly. "I didn't think I would either," she admitted without turning. He stopped beside her, close enough to feel the pull of her presence, but not close enough to presume. "Leo's still asleep?" she asked. "Out like a light," he said. "I read him 3 chapters of that space novel you bought him. I don't think he made it past chapter 1. She nodded, her eyes still fixed on the waves. They stood in silence for a while. Then, slowly, Natalie turned to face him. "You spoke your truth," she said. "I had to. You didn't have to do it that publicly." "I know," he replied, voice rough. "But I needed to prove to you, to Leo, to myself, that I wasn't going to hide anymore." Her gaze flickered, even if it meant lighting everything else on fire. He didn't answer immediately. "The board's upset," he admitted. "A few donors are pulling back. The media's relentless. But I feel lighter, and I don't regret it." Natalie exhaled slowly. "That's not what I meant." Daniel looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were still wary, still guarding that part of her that had learned the hard way not to trust love without cost. "I'm not here to defend the chaos," he said gently. "I'm just here." She nodded. "I know." They walked together, slowly, the sand cold beneath their feet. "You confronted her," she said after a long pause. Daniel didn't ask who. He knew. "Yes." "Where?" "The old estate on James Island," he said. "She wasn't expecting me." Natalie swallowed. "What did she say?" "At first, she denied it. Claimed she had only acted out of concern, that she was protecting my future." He shook his head. "And then, she got angry. Said I was throwing everything away over a woman who had no place in our world." Natalie didn't flinch, but her shoulders tensed. Daniel noticed. "I told her," he continued, "that the only thing I was throwing away was her control. That Leo deserves to grow up in truth, not legacy." Silence stretched between them, wind rustling through sea oats along the dunes. "And your father?" she asked quietly. Daniel's mouth pressed into a line. "He's silent, which is worse, in some ways. But he's never had a spine when it came to her. I always wondered how she ended up with someone like that. She didn't choose a partner. She chose an audience," he said bitterly. They stopped walking. "I don't want Leo growing up in that kind of silence," Natalie whispered, "where things fester in pretty houses and behind closed doors. I don't want him to think love means erasing yourself for the sake of peace." "He won't," Daniel said, "because he has you." She turned to him, eyes searching. "And you?" she asked. "Where do you stand in all this?" Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, weathered, and familiar. It was the letter, the one she had written 12 years ago, one he'd never received, sealed with her handwriting and smudged ink. "You found it," she said, breath-catching. "She never sent it," he said. "She hid it in her safe. I only found it when I forced her to open the records drawer. It was buried under years of paperwork." Natalie took the letter with trembling hands. It was creased now, the corners worn. She turned it over, as if verifying. "It was real. I didn't think you'd ever read it." "I did," he said, "twice. Then a third time. Then I couldn't stop." Her voice cracked. "I wrote it in a hospital room, 1 hour after Leo was born. I was scared, alone, and all I wanted was for you to know." "I know now," he said. "And what do you feel?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. "Everything," he replied. "Grief, shame, anger, love, but mostly, I feel like I failed you." She shook her head. "You didn't fail me. You were failed." They stood on the shoreline with a storm behind them and something tender, something painfully alive opening between them. "I kept asking myself," she said, "how different things could have been if you'd known, if we'd raised him together." Daniel nodded. "Me too." "And now?" she asked. "Now, I just want to be the man you both can depend on." Natalie's eyes welled with tears. "And what if I'm not ready for that?" "Then I'll wait," he said, "for however long it takes." A seabird cried above them, circling against the amber sky. "Daniel," she said softly, "I don't want Leo to believe love always means sacrifice. I want him to see 2 people who show up, even when it's hard." "Then let's show up," he said, "together, as we are. No promises we're not ready to make, just truth." Natalie reached for his hand. For the first time in over a decade, their fingers intertwined, not out of nostalgia, not from fear, but from a fragile living choice. The sun crested the horizon. Light spilled across the water like gold dot, and in its warmth, people learning, slowly, painfully, beautifully, what it meant to begin again. The wind that passed through Charleston that late summer evening was gentle, scented with salt and jasmine. It curled through the streets like memory. Like music drifting from a porch someone forgot to leave. Natalie stood on the balcony of her new studio, an airy, sun-filled space above an old bookshop on Queen Street. The place still smelled faintly of sawdust and paint, the scent of beginnings. Below her, the city murmured with life, and inside, soft cello music played from Leo's tablet as he worked on a sketch at the wide farmhouse table that had become their shared creative space. It had been 6 months since the gala. 6 months since Daniel spoke the truth that shattered the pristine glass facade of the Carter family legacy and, in doing so, gave them all something real to hold on to. In the weeks that followed, everything changed and nothing did. Daniel stepped away from the day-to-day operations of the Carter Foundation, delegating most of his responsibilities to a new director. The press had called it a retreat, a scandal-induced sabbatical. But Natalie knew better. He wasn't retreating. He was rebuilding with them. Natalie looked up at the knock on her door. She already knew who it was before she opened it. Daniel stood there, a paper bag in one hand and a book tucked under his arm. He looked like someone who had finally made peace with the mirror. "You brought dinner?" she asked, smiling. "And a surprise," he said, handing her the bag and the book. "I found a copy of that poetry collection you once said got you through your first year alone with Leo, out of print, but I had a guy." She opened the book slowly, the pages delicate and yellowed with time. Inside the front cover, he had written, a note in his familiar, steady hand, "To the bravest person I've ever known. For every chapter we lost and every one we get to right now." Natalie closed the book carefully, pressing it to her chest for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for this." Daniel set the rest of the takeout on the table, and Leo looked up, grinning. "Dad, I got the rover to work with the voice commands. Want to try?" Daniel lit up. "Absolutely." They crowded around the little robot together, Daniel crouching beside Leo while Natalie watched, her heart fuller than she had thought possible. Later, after dinner, when Leo had fallen asleep on the couch, his mouth opened slightly, arms sprawled, Daniel turned to her. "You're still not wearing the necklace," he said quietly. Natalie glanced down at her bare collarbone. "I'm not ready." He nodded, not hurt, just accepting. "You didn't ask me what I've been working on," she said, standing and walking to her drafting table. Daniel followed. On the table lay a large folder, blueprints, sketches, and mood boards. "What is it?" she smiled. "A community arts center, for kids who don't have a place. Free workshops, instruments, paint, clay, a reading room, a place to be messy and curious." Daniel looked down at the plans, and for a moment he didn't speak. "You're building what neither of us had," he said. "I'm building what Leo needed, what every kid needs. A space where love isn't a currency or a condition, just ... a given." He ran his fingers along the edge of the blueprint. "I want to fund it," he said. She looked at him, surprised. "Not because I have to," he clarified, "because I believe in it, and in you. I want my name attached to something that heals." Natalie blinked back sudden tears. "You can be on the board," she said, teasing gently. He smiled. "Only if I get to build the reading room shelves." "You don't know how to build shelves." "I'll learn." They laughed, the kind of laugh that came only after pain had softened, and love had been allowed to grow in the spaces once reserved for fear. As the evening wore on, Natalie walked Daniel to the door. He paused there, lingering. "I've been thinking," he said, "about everything we've been through, and I realized ... I don't want a life without hard conversations. I don't want safety that costs me honesty." She looked at him, a long, steady look, and "I want us, whatever that means. No perfect bow, no sudden promises, just the real, ordinary, extraordinary mess of this." Natalie felt the tears sting her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I used to think love had to be a rescue," she said. "Now I think maybe it's just showing up, again and again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unadorned velvet box. She held her breath, but when he opened it, there was no ring, just a folded note. She opened it. It read, no conditions, no temptations, just a seat beside you whenever you're ready. Natalie closed the note gently, then looked up at him. I'm not saying yes. I'm not asking for yes, he said. She stepped forward and kissed his cheek. But I am saying ... Come back tomorrow. Daniel smiled. Always. And when he left, it wasn't with the ache of distance, it was with the quiet certainty of return. Later that night, Natalie stood at her window. She watched the city settle into darkness, into peace. Leo stirred in his sleep, murmuring something about Mars and circuits, and Natalie whispered to the room, to the life she had rebuilt, "We are no longer waiting." She walked to her workbench and picked up the plans again. She rolled them, tied them with ribbon. Tomorrow, she'd file the permits. She'd call the volunteers. She'd begin, and when she did, it wouldn't be just her name on the wall, it would be theirs, because the letter she once thought he'd never read had become the story they now lived, word by word, day by day, not a fairy tale, but a truth more powerful than fiction, a family not made by force, but by choice. The letter she thought he'd never read is a moving story of silence, sacrifice, and ultimately at the heart of it is Natalie Brooks, a young woman who raised her son Leo in the shadows of a truth she never chose to keep hidden. Across 12 long years, she carried not only the weight of single motherhood, but also the unhealed wound of a love lost without explanation. Daniel Carter, the father of her child and heir to a powerful Southern family, lived unaware of the boy that bore his eyes, his curiosity, and his fierce intelligence until fate and truth came knocking. When Daniel discovered the truth that had been deliberately kept from him by his controlling mother, he faced a choice: protect his public image and family reputation, or claim his child and take responsibility for a past stolen from him. In choosing truth, he didn't just recover the life he had lost, he rebuilt something far more meaningful. Daniel's public confession at the Carter Foundation Gala, and his unwavering steps toward fatherhood and partnership, mark a powerful transformation from a man ruled by expectation to one ruled by purpose. Together, Natalie and Daniel didn't magically return to the life they'd once dreamed of, they created a new one. Through forgiveness, accountability, and small daily choices, they became a family by design, not accident. Leo didn't just gain a father, he witnessed two adults grow into people worthy of each other and of him. The lesson: this story reminds us that truth, no matter how delayed, still holds the power to set us free. Hiding from the past may protect us temporarily, but healing can only begin when we confront what was lost and choose love over fear, over legacy, over pride. How you can apply it: if there's something you've left unsaid, an apology, a truth, or a story still buried, perhaps today is the day to speak it. Because courage isn't found in perfection, it's found in showing up as we are, for those we love. Now here's a question for you. What do you think mattered most in this story? A. Speaking the truth, no matter how painful. B. Protecting one's public image and avoiding conflict. Comment your answer below with A or B, and tell us why. What are your thoughts on this story? Do you believe people deserve a second chance if they've been kept in the dark? Let's hear your opinions. Share in the comments, so we can learn from each other. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories that inspire, heal, and move us all forward. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating content that matters.